If you have your Bibles, open them up to the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis, chapter 24, very first book of the Bible. We are picking back up today in our study of Genesis. If you don't realize this is kind of wild as I was preparing this week. We started the book of Genesis in January of 2022. We've been in this book for 3.5 years already. How many of you were here when we started Genesis back in... Yeah, how many of you are newer since when we started the book of Genesis? Yeah, isn't that wild? So here's what we do around here. We go through books of the Bible usually in like 10 to 12 week chunks. And we'll go through 10 or 12 weeks, and then we'll go to another book for 10 or 12 weeks, and we'll come back to that book. And we do that for a couple of reasons. One, it kind of gives you a little bit of a steady diet. You get some Old Testament, New Testament. Two, it's 2025 and your attention spans are like that long. So it helps to just change it up a little bit. One time we did the Gospel of Matthew for 2 straight years. It took us 2 years to go through all of Gospel of Matthew. So we don't make you do that, right? We give it a little bit of a break. But we're in Genesis, and it's exciting to be back in Genesis because we're picking up back in the story of Abraham, the story of Abraham. So if you would, stand up. We're covering the entire chapter this morning, all 67 verses. You're going to be all right. But we're only going to make you stand for verses 12 through 14, all right? Genesis 24, 12 through 14. These verses are really kind of the theme of the whole chapter. So we're going to read that, but then we're going to go through the entire chapter. And he, this is the servant of Abraham, and he said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. Behold, I'm standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let the young woman to whom I shall say, please let down your jar that I may drink, and who shall say, drink, and I will water your camels. Let her be the one whom you've appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You can be seated. So the book of Genesis is critical for understanding the entire story of the Bible. It's not just the first book, it's the book that establishes everything else that's going to happen. You not only see the creation of the world and everything in it, but you have the creation of man. Man is distinct. He's an image bearer of God. Man's given a mission to take dominion, right? We talked about that in our Coram Deo series, the cultural mandate. Be fruitful, multiply, cultivate the earth, right? Create, beautify, all those are things in the book of Genesis. And then we get to the fall of man. We get to man's sinfulness and rebellion. And the consequences of that is going to be death. And if everything left there in the book of Genesis, it'd just be a really, really bad story about our fate. But what happens in the book of Genesis is in chapter 12, we are introduced to a man by the name of Abram who will become Abraham. And Abraham is going to be the father of a nation. God comes to Abraham and he says, look, I'm going to be your God. And your people are going to be my people. And Abraham's like, I got no people. I have no offspring. And he's like, and I'm old, and so is my wife. So that math doesn't math very well. And God says, I'm going to build you into a great nation. I will multiply you. I will make you fruitful. And so in Genesis 12, we pick up this story of God establishing a covenant with Abraham. And watch, guys, that storyline is going to go all throughout the Bible. Because what's going to happen is it's going to be from the offspring of Abraham that will come a son of Abraham, right? That's how Matthew introduces Jesus. Jesus, the son of Abraham, the son of David. He's a son of Abraham. He's from the lineage of Abraham. And he's going to not only save the people of Abraham, he's going to graft outsiders into the family of Abraham. And Jesus is the promised offspring of Abraham that ultimately we find our salvation. And so that storyline starts in Genesis and goes throughout. So watch, this morning in Genesis 24, we're looking at the story of Isaac. And for the next, until now to Christmas, from now till December, we're going to be in Genesis, and we're going to not only see the story of Isaac, who is Abraham's son, we'll then get into the story of Jacob, who is Isaac's son. So we're going to keep following what God is doing with this family, and ultimately, not just what he's doing with the family, but what he's doing in this new nation. This is a budding nation that he is building. So from a macro level, we're looking at the storyline of God's work in Abraham. At a micro level, we're going to see some particular things in this story that teach us about the nature of God, about the nature of man, about the work of God's providence in our lives, and the importance of our faith in the midst of that providence. Some of you may not be familiar with the word Providence, other than it's a shopping center in Mount Juliet. However, providence is a word that used to be really common vernacular in most Christians' repertoire. The word providence definitionally means this: it's the working of God's sovereignty to continually uphold, to guide, and to care for his creation. In other words, watch, it's the working out of God's sovereignty in real time in history. That's what providence is. The Heidelberg Catechism, which was written hundreds and hundreds of years ago, has a really earthy definition of providence, which I really like. It says this: providence is the almighty and ever-present power of God, by which he upholds, as with his hand, heaven and earth and all creatures, and so rules them that leaf and blade, rain and drought, fruitful and lean years, food and drink, health and sickness, prosperity and poverty, all things, in fact, come not by chance, but by his fatherly hand. The idea that leaf and blade and rain and drought, watch this, in other words, all the particulars of life come from him. Theologians often talk about God's eternal decrees. Eternal meaning from eternity past, meaning always in the mind of God existing. His eternal decrees are secret. We don't know the eternal decrees of God. But the providence of God is the working out of those eternal decrees in space, time, and history. In other words, you and I don't know the mysteries of God's eternal decrees, but we do watch how God's providence unfolds those things. Does that make sense? And so the providence of God is his working out of his eternal plan in time and history, which means it gets down into your life, into the particulars of your everydayness, your family, your troubles, your work issues, all of those kinds of things are where the providence of God shows up. Even non-Christians know that this exists. Even unstudied Christians who don't call it providence know what this is. You hear people say it all the time. You might even say it like this all the time. Well, I don't think anything happens on accident. Or I think everything happens for a reason. Why do you think people say that? That's the providence of God. God is at work in the everydayness of my circumstances. Nothing is left to chance, luck, or fate. Those things are nonsensical things. They don't exist. Proverbs 27:1 tells us that even the casting of the die belongs to the Lord. So what we're going to see today is how that plays out in the real-time actions of a family. And a son named Isaac who needs a wife, and all that's going to unfold in God's events and story to bring that about. So if you have your Bible still open, let's go to the beginning of 24, and let's watch how this unfolds. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. I want you to remember something real quick. Abraham, last time we were in Genesis 23, Abraham's wife had died. Sarah had died. And they bought a cave that became a burial ground for her. And now he's older in years. His wife's died. So he knows he doesn't have a lot longer left. And so his mind immediately is about to go towards the state of his son, which is he's 40-something years old and he's still not married, which means he still doesn't have an heir. And this is the family that's supposed to give birth to his offspring as numerous as the sand of the shore. So Abraham, blessed in years, says to his servant, the oldest of his household, verse 2, who had charge of all that he had, he told him this: put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughter of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. The servant said to him, perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to the land from which you came? Abraham said to him, see to it that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, and who spoke to me and swore to me, to your offspring I will give this land. The God who made that promise to me, he will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine. Only you must not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham. This is a way that they made agreements. It's like shaking hands. It was a way of swearing an oath. It was like signing a contract. Put his hand under his thigh of his master and swore to him concerning this matter. So the last time we were in Genesis, we saw that Sarah had died. Now Abraham is looking for a wife, and he tells the servant, I'm sending you back to where I'm from. I'm sending you back to the land from where I came from to find a wife. And here's the deal. He is not to have a wife from the Canaanites that are here. He is not to find. He needs to find a wife from his people, from his homeland, not from the Canaanites. So don't take him back there, right? This is the land in which God is bringing us. He's going to stay here. I'm sending you there. And the servant's like, okay, I'll go. But, what if they don't want to go with me? What if I show up and like, hey, you want to marry my master's son back down in Canaan? And they say, no, I don't want to go with you. Abraham says, well, if they don't go with you, then you're free from the oath. But he said, but the angel of the Lord will go before you. I want you to recognize something that's really important here. Abraham's words here, the Lord will send an angel before you to secure for my son a wife. These are the last recorded words of Abraham in Scripture. And I want you to contrast this from the first recorded words of Abraham in Scripture, which is him questioning the fact that God made this big promise to him. And he says, I don't even have any offspring. Look at the doubt of like, what do you mean I'm going to be the father of a nation? I have no offspring. To now the servant's like, how am I going to find a woman for your son? He's like, the Lord is going to send an angel in front of you. Notice the difference in this man's faith from his first words to his last words. The Lord will send a servant. And he tells the servant to swear by an oath that he will go. Now what's fascinating here is Abraham is going to send him out. This is going to be a long journey. But Abraham is trusting the providence of God to pair his servant with the girl that God has in mind. He's not sending a text message, be like, hey, family, I'm sending a servant. See if there's any free women out there available. There's no social media apps for him to go find available women in the land of Ur. He's going to have to send his servant blindly and trust that the providence of God in all these things is going to arrange the circumstance by which his servant will find his son's future wife. He believed that the Lord was sending the angel ahead, but I want you to notice something. He doesn't tell the servant there's going to be the stopping of the sun or a cloud in the sky with an arrow over her house. There's no breaking of natural law. It's just normal events are going to happen. But Abraham believes that the Lord's in the normal events and will bring him about to accomplish his purposes. This is the providence of God. He's not hoping. He's not doing this. He doesn't believe in that. There's not blind fate. There's not chance. In fact, J.I. Packer said it like this: believers are never in the grip of blind forces. Never. All that happens to them is divinely planned. And each event of that divine plan comes as a new summons to us to trust, obey, and rejoice in him. Everything that happens in your life is a new chance for you to say, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to obey you. I'm going to rejoice in your plan. This story gives us, the readers, an advantage that those in the story do not have. We get to see from 30,000 foot the way the Lord's at work in this. We get to watch the providence of God unfolding. We get a peek into the supernatural workings of God. I was telling the students this last weekend in that student event. I said, Deuteronomy 29:29 says the secret things belong to the Lord. The things that he has revealed to us, he has revealed for us and for our children. In other words, God has given us a lot to go by, but he has not told us everything. And what does that mean? The secret things belong to the Lord. Well, it means what he has revealed to us, you should act on and live on. The things that he has not revealed, you are to trust him with. There are mysteries you don't know how to make sense of. And the providence of God and the working of God in our everyday lives are examples of this. The providence of God is going to unfold in this book, but one of the things that you're going to see unfold is the working of faith in the midst of that providence. Notice right out the get-go, the faith of Abraham. The faith of Abraham. Go. I believe the Lord's going to send you to the right people, to the right person. Go. The Lord is going before you. Now, I want you to look at the faith of the servant, beginning in verse 10. The servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. And he made the camels kneel down outside the city. So after he arrives, he comes to a well, and he makes the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time when women go out to draw water. So the ladies would go out to the well at the end of the day, draw water that would last them through the night and into the next morning. He goes out there during this time. And he said to the Lord, this is the servant. This is our text that we read. O Lord, God of my master, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. Behold, I'm standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let the young woman to whom I shall say, please let down your jar that I may drink, and who will say back to him, drink, I will give water to your camels. Let her be the one whom you've appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you've shown your steadfast love to my master. So he reaches the city, and immediately he begins to pray. And he prays for two things to happen. I want you to notice. The first thing he prays that would happen is that whenever a lady shows up there to draw water, he's going to ask her for a drink. And what is she going to do? She's going to give him the drink. The second thing he's going to wait for is for her, not him, for her to say, and I'll water your camels. The servant prays that specific prayer. I'm going to ask for water. She's going to give it. But the sign that she might be the one is she's going to unpromptedly say, and I'll water your camels. That's what he prays. And I want you to get a sense here of what it would require to water these camels. She shows up likely with a 3-gallon jar for getting water. That's how big the jars were for fetching water. 3 gallons. The average camel would need to drink 25 gallons of water to fill their thirst. And how many does the servant bring with him on the trip? 10. He's got 10 camels, okay? So Rebecca is going to show up, but his prayer already is, okay, she's going to give me something to drink, and then she's going to volunteer to take care of my camels. Just so you understand, this well and the way that wells worked then is that it would be a big hole dug into the earth, not to put a bucket through. You're thinking like buckets, wells like here in the States. This would have been a hole big enough with steps built in to walk down to a running living spring. So you're going up and down steps to retrieve water, okay? That's the idea here. So this would have been for her to provide for 10 camels to drink somewhere between 80 to 100 trips up these stairs if she offers it. So let's continue. Verse 15. Before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, in other words, from that lineage, from that family, came out with her water jar on her shoulder. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, please give me a little water to drink from your jar. She said, drink, my lord. And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. So she's like, here you go. He drinks. And then she said, I will draw water also for your camels until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water, and she drew for all the camels. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. So I want you to catch the context here, okay? Watch. So he makes this journey all the way from the homeland of Abraham, all the way from Canaan, where Abraham lived and where he lived, all the way to Abraham's original dwelling place in Mesopotamia. I've got a map here. I want you to see this real quick, just so you see the context. Okay, so this would have been a trip, just so that you understand here, this would have been a trip that would have taken a month or 2 to make. This would have been a 1,000-mile journey with 10 camels and a caravan filled with people, okay? Enough supplies to live on, trunks filled with supplies that they needed and goods that they needed and clothing that they needed, that kind of thing. They show up finally at Nahor, and upon arriving, he begins to pray. And he says, okay, Lord, here's what I'm looking for. If you're going to give me success, I pray that the woman that you send here will not only give me a drink, but will offer to give drink to my camel. And I think this is fascinating because, again, he's going to trust the providence of God in the everydayness of regular actions. He doesn't ask for a sign in the sky, a special revelation. He doesn't want an arrow bopping over her head when she shows up. He's not asking for for an angel to show up and be like, psst. He's simply asking for a rational criteria that he can measure, yet that requires some specific actions to know that the Lord is in it. And he prays that prayer. And sure enough, Rebekah shows up, not only offers a drink, but then offers to give to the camels water as well. This would have taken about an hour and a half to 2 hours for her to fulfill up and down the steps. And notice that it says in verse 21, the man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey. So she's just going back and forth, making trips to water these camels, and he's just watching. Is this the one? I want you to notice the faith that it already required for him to pray. Notice that Abraham did not instruct him to pray that prayer. This is his own faith. This is his own seeking to watch how God might be at work. He didn't ask for anything miraculous. And I want you to think about this too, because I think this is fascinating. Notice in verse 15 where it says, before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah shows up. That means, watch, I think this is fascinating. He shows up from his journey. They're tired, they're thirsty. He gets to the well, it's end of the day, and he's praying this prayer. Before he's even arrived there to start praying, Rebekah has undoubtedly left the house and is on her way to the well. Before he finishes praying, Rebekah shows up. It says before he had finished, Rebekah shows up. Now here's my question for you. Does that mean the servant's prayer was just really lucky? No. Does this mean that his prayer alone is the reason why she came? Nope. But this is that entanglement of the mystery of God's providence and our praying and faith. Our seeking and our asking and our watching and our waiting is all wrapped into this. Now, here's what happens. Look at verse 28. Verse 22. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring, wearing a half shekel and 2 bracelets for her arms, weighing 10 gold shekels. So he starts unloading some of the family treasure and gives to her and says, please tell me whose daughter you are. Is there a room in your father's house for us to spend the night? She said to him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. She added, we have plenty of both straw and fodder and room to spend the night. The man, upon hearing this, knew immediately she's from the family that I'm looking for. And what does he do? The man bowed his head and he worshiped the Lord. Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and his faithfulness towards my master. As for me, the Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's kinsman. When he sees that the very thing he prayed for, God has done, he begins to rejoice. Now, here's the deal. She doesn't even know anything about any of this at this point. She has no idea you're about to get wifed up, dude. The eyes of the Lord are on you, and yet here's the deal. No doubt in Rebekah's life, she's been wondering who it's going to be, and where's he going to come from, and when is the Lord going to provide? And she takes off on any old day to grab water. And she's going to have an encounter with the Lord that she's not even aware of when she sees this servant. You see how God's at work in all these things? None of the people in the story have any insight about what's going on the way we do. She then, after hearing this, verse 28, runs and tells all of her mother's house about these things. So she recounts the story. And then in verse 29, it says, Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. Anybody familiar with that name, Laban? If you're familiar with the book of Genesis, and this is a little bit of a spoiler here, but where we're about to head is Laban's going to show up later too. When Isaac's son, Jacob, is seeking a wife, and he runs into 2 daughters of Laban. And there's this little cat and mouse game that's going to go on, but I don't want to spoil anymore. We'll get there in a couple weeks, all right? Get there in a couple weeks. So Laban is the sister of Rebekah's mom. And when he hears the story and then he sees the man coming, he invites him in. Verses 28 through 60 is essentially the servant going to their home and retelling the story. The servant retells the entire story to Laban and the family. Now, why do you think he does this? He tells the story because he wants to convince Laban and the whole family that God's at work in this. God's hand's in this. And ultimately, why does he want them to see that God's hand is in it? Because they want him to send Rebekah to marry Isaac. So he recounts the story, he tells the story, and ultimately we get to verse 56 where Laban and Rebekah's mom say, yes, we see the Lord in this, she can go. But then the next morning they're like, hey, can we wait 10 days? I mean, things are moving kind of fast here, you know. Rebekah just went to get water yesterday. Now she's about to pack her stuff. And they said, can we just wait 10 days? And the servant in verse 56 says, no, I don't want to be delayed any longer to my master. I've been gone for months. He's been traveling for months. I want to get back to fulfill my oath to my master. And here's the deal. Now they're in this crossroads. Laban and Rebekah's mom said yes. Now they're saying, can we wait? And finally they said, let's let her decide. What does she have to say? What happens now? They go to Rebekah and they say, here's everything that they're saying. Verse 57, let us call the young woman and ask her. And they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said 3 words, I will go. I will go. So they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men, and they blessed Rebekah and said to her, O sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s. May your offspring possess the gate of those who hate him. Rebekah, not only in addition to Abraham showing faith, and the servant showing faith, and Laban and Rebekah's mom showing faith, ultimately, Rebekah demonstrates faith and trust in the providence of God in her life. And she says, I will go. In verses 61 through 67, we watch how the story ends. Rebekah and her young women arose, and they rode on camels and followed the man, the servant. Thus the servant took Rebekah and went his way, which, by the way, would have been a month-long journey back to the land of Canaan. Now, Isaac had returned from Beer Lahai Roi and was dwelling in the Negev. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening. You have to imagine that after the servant left, he probably knew for weeks, like, yeah, he's still probably not there yet. But there finally comes a turning point where Isaac's beginning to wonder, like, I wonder what's happening. I bet he's there. I wonder if he's having success. I wonder if they've found anybody. And then weeks and weeks keep going by, and he's looking every day like, any sign of people coming? It's like when you're awaiting your Amazon package, you know, you've been waiting on. It's like, is it here? Is it arrived yet? And every day he's going out and he's looking. He's like, are the camels? Where's the caravan, right? And eventually, one day he goes out to the field toward evening, and he lifted his eyes, and behold, there were camels coming. The caravan is back. Now here's the question. Is it back with a wife? Has God provided? Has God given what he's desired? And Rebekah lifts up her eyes, and she sees a man, Isaac, out in the field. And she gets off the camel, and she goes over to the servant, and she's like, hey, who's that guy walking in the field to meet us? And the servant said, it's my master. It's the one. It's him. So she immediately took her veil and covered herself. She covered herself with a veil like a bride. And then the servant shows up and gets there, and now he has to tell Isaac everything that happened, because now Isaac gets to be a part of watching how God was at work for him. How God ordained and orchestrated all the circumstances so that now this woman, Rebekah, is there, all by the hand and providence of God. And what does it say? Then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife. And he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Isaac hears the story, sees the woman, which, by the way, we were told earlier was very attractive. Always got her steps in at the well. And he takes her into his mother's tent. Why is that significant? Because now she is going to be the matriarch of the family. And there, immediately they're married. She becomes his wife. And I want you to notice something significant here. It says, and he loved her. This is the first time in all the Bible that romantic marital love is ever expressed. He loves her. We see the faith of Abraham. We see the faith of the servant. We see the faith of Rebekah. We see the faith of Laban. And we see the faith of Isaac. And all of this, God's providential workings are going, and we see them accepting, receiving, and trusting what God is doing. And I just want you to understand something. God works this way in your life. You don't need, for God to suspend the natural laws of the universe in order to demonstrate his workings in your life. He is providentially working all the time in the everydayness of life. In fact, it's often after the fact, and we look backwards, that we can see how God's providence was bringing certain things about that in real time we couldn't see, right? I bet in your own life, if you thought about mile marker moments, an encounter, meeting somebody, a job that you took, a conversation that you had, that you would say, if this thing right here wouldn't happen, my life would be a different life. We all have those things. Those are the providential workings of God. I've told this story around here before in the past that my wife and I are both from here. We were really good friends in high school. Our senior year of high school, in the summer after, we were with each other all the time with some other friends, but we were really close, and there was kind of something going on there, but I was an idiot, so it didn't really ever go anywhere. And so she ended up going to Cumberland, and I ended up enrolling at Vol State. I didn't ever go, but it's a different sermon for a different day. But I was enrolled, and we kind of just drifted apart. Nothing materialized. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to the Army. I don't even want to stay in Lebanon anyway. And so I signed up to go to the Army. Well, while I'm at boot camp and I'm gone in the Army, my mother goes to help my cousin. My cousin, who's a little bit older than me, lived in Murfreesboro, but found herself in Lebanon on the north side of town in some really, 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 really bad hotel rooms, strung out on drugs. And she called her Aunt Ginger, my mom, because she knew Aunt Ginger would come and help her. And so my mom goes on that side of town, which she never did because she lives in Watertown. And she went and helped my cousin. And since she needed to go grocery shopping that day, rather than go to Walmart where she normally went, she was already beside Al's Foodland or Mike's Foodland now. And so she goes from the little hotel over to Mike's Foodland, and she gets her groceries, and she was writing a check for her groceries. Kids, checks are these pieces of paper. I'm not sure if y'all know what those are. And when you did that, if it was over a certain amount, somebody would have to approve your check. They'd have to look at your license. And so my mom was told by the cashier, you got to go over to the desk, and somebody has to approve your check. So she walks over to the desk to get her check approved, and who is it that comes up to approve her check? My wife. And she looks at my mom's name, Ginger Reed, and she was like, "Are you Erik's mom?" And she was like, "Yeah, who are you?" She was like, "I'm Katrina." And she was like, "Oh, yeah, I've heard about you." And so my mom tells her I'm in boot camp. She shows her a picture of me and gives her my address and tells her I'm graduating in a couple of weeks. So Katrina writes me a letter and shows up to my graduation. She was just chasing me down. I was like, she was. Bro, I just got out of basic. Chill out. No. And so after I graduate boot camp, I'm off for several weeks. I'm on leave, and we started hanging out. And before you know it, I'm blinking my eyes, and even though I live 8 hours away, I'm now dating the girl I went to school with and was friends with who's back in Lebanon, and now I've got an anchor point back in Lebanon that I never anticipated having. My plan was to stay gone, be a lifer in the military. I thrived. I excelled in it. I was good at it. I liked it. I had no desire to live in Lebanon. Who wants to be born and raised and stay in Lebanon? And now all of a sudden my affections begin to change, and rather than being a lifer in the military, I want to go back and have a family. And the Lord begins working in her life, and she comes to faith and gets baptized, and the Lord begins to reel me in. And before you know it, I'm blinking my eyes, and I'm married, I have a family, and I'm planting a church at 25 years old in my hometown when I never had any desire to remain in my hometown. I wasn't asking for you to clap, but I didn't do anything at all. My point is, if my cousin doesn't call my aunt, my cousin doesn't call her aunt my mom, and my mom doesn't go to the grocery store and meet Katrina, I'm not married to Katrina. I'm not living in Lebanon. There's no Journey Church. There's no children that I have. Like, my life is a different life altogether with one set of events that happen on one particular day. Every one of your lives are like that. You are here today because of the working of God's providence. There's no accidents in your life. There's no chance. There's no luck. There's no blind fate. There's only the providence of God. And not all of those things are always good things. They're not always easy things. Traveling for months in this caravan probably wasn't fun. But God is always at work in our circumstances. And the call for us is, in his providence, we want to live by and act on faith with whatever God is doing in our lives. In fact, I'm going to leave you with 4 quick points this morning to wrap our time up. Faith means acting in light of God's providence. Acting in light of God's providence. I want you to notice it's not passive. Yes, God is working providentially, but our faith is not passive, it's active. And what I mean by that, Abraham sends the servant. He knows his son needs a wife, so he sends the servant to look. He's not passive, going like, well, the Lord will just drop one in our lap. He sends a servant to find one. The servant travels and prays and acts in real time in history. Rebecca says, I will go. Christians should take steps of obedience in our lives, trusting that God is weaving his purposes through our choices. Number 2, providence should lead us to worship, not worry. When you recognize that God is providentially in control of everything in your life, this should not lead you to worry, but to worship. Notice the servant's immediate response when he sees what God is up to is he praises. He praises. It wasn't even in the bag at that point. But he says, I see your hand. And he worships. By the way, this helps to reframe for you too when you're going through setbacks and delays and struggles, to trust God's timing in your life, to trust what he's up to in your difficulties, to praise him through those things. Number 3, God's providence invites us to a courageous faith. I just love the fact that Rebecca said, I will go. She's never met this man. She doesn't know anybody that she's about to go with. But she said, I will go. God's providence in your life doesn't eliminate risk. It actually calls you to an obedience that can be costly and risky and uncertain at times. But this breeds courage. And that courage might mean that God's leading you to something new. He might be leading you to step out to start something, or a new job, or a ministry, or a hard decision that you're working through, or parting ways in a relationship that you feel trapped in, or maybe it's trusting God courageously to provide for you that spouse or that person that you're just so afraid it's never going to show up, it's never going to happen, it's never going to arrive. There's so many things in our lives where we're praying for a particular thing, or we're waiting for a particular thing, and you are not left to blind forces and chance. However, you are called to act in courageous faith also. And then number 4 and last, God's providence works through community. Nowhere in this story is it really a solo effort. Abraham goes to his servant goes and he meets Rebecca. Rebecca has her family. Rebecca then goes back with the servant. Everybody is leaning on everybody else. There is a web of relationships involved in God's working here. And I just want to remind us that that's true of us as well. God often demonstrates his providence through the relationships and community that we're a part of, through the counsel of others, through the prayers of others, through the encouragement of others, through the obedience of others. All these things are part of our lives. Genesis 24 shows us that the providence of God doesn't remove our need for faith, but it invites it. God is working in your life. God has been working in your life. You are where you are today by a series of events orchestrated by the divine plan of God. Oh, sure, you were involved in it, and that's where the mystery of God's sovereign workings and providence and your acting in faith are weaved together in a way that you can't untangle, but you must live in the tension of. The response should be for us to give thanks to God for all the ways he's been faithful in our lives. And let past faithfulness remind us of his present and future faithfulness as well. Here's how I want to wrap us up this morning. We do this around here pretty regularly. We ask folks who need prayer to take a step of faith and be courageous enough to say, hey, I could use prayer from the saints.
Hey guys, this is Pastor Erik here from the Journey Church. Thanks for watching and listening to the sermon. This is the end of the video for a reason, because during this time in our service, we go into an opportunity of praying for one another as a church body. Individuals who need prayer stand up and indicate that, and members of the body go around them and pray for them. And so because you're not in the room experiencing that, we would still like to pray for you. So if there are things that you need prayer for, there's things in your lives that you want others petitioning the Lord on your behalf for, why don't you email us at pray@tjclive.com. That's pray@tjclive.com. Someone will get that and immediately not only pray for you, but respond to you to let you know and to find out if there's anything else that we can do for you.